Welcome everyone to today's webinar, Engaging Patients on Their Financial Path. Does your payment solution measure up? My name is Jacob Emerson with Becker's Hospital Review. On behalf of everyone here at Becker's Healthcare, thank you and welcome, and thank you for joining us. Before we begin, I'm going to walk through a few quick housekeeping instructions. If you have any questions throughout today's webinar, you can type those into the Q&A box you see on your screen. Today's session is being recorded and will be available after the event. You can use the same link you used to log into today's webinar to access the recording. Lastly, if at any time you have trouble with the audio or the video, please try refreshing your browser first. You can also submit any technical questions into the Q&A box. We're here to help you at any time. At this time, it's my pleasure to turn the floor over to Casey Williams, who is the Senior Vice President of Patient Engagement at RevSpring. He'll introduce our presenters and begin today's presentation. Casey.
Yeah, thank you, Jacob. I appreciate it and appreciate the continued partnership with Becker's. You guys always do a great job and appreciate the education. As we think about, engaging patients correctly, I think it's very significant that we focus in on making sure that it's all about the patient and in terms of making it personal and making it very easy. Oftentimes we are interacting with different verticals in life in terms of how we spend our dollars, whether that's in terms of entertainment, whether that's in travel, and we have these certain expectations from a user experience. We have these expectations in terms of when things become difficult. We often move our mouse, our cursor up to the top right hand corner of the screen, and we click the little X, and we cancel the session when things become difficult or when obstacles are put in the way, or anytime that we experience friction as a whole. And that's really true as it comes into healthcare as well, especially in terms of once the balances have adjudicated, our insurance has paid their portion, and now becomes our personal responsibility in terms of what we owe. And if we're experiencing any type of friction, if it's not intuitive, oftentimes we're going to go up to the right-hand corner and we're going to click out. And then we're going to delay that payment either multiple weeks, if not months, within that process. And I think it's really important that at the core of today that we're really listening around how do we make it personal and how do we make it easy by removing the friction. And it first starts with personalizing the payment experience for every individual patient. And you do that by using intelligence. You think about this, and I've joked a lot of times, if I could actually have a little kind of blueprint before I go into my house after I get home from work and know how to interact with my kids in the sense of what kind of day have they had. I have a 15-year-old daughter that, is sometimes, an emotional high state and sometimes an emotional low state. And if I could just have a disclaimer before I enter that house that says, hey, your daughter is a low propensity today, tread lightly, my life would be greatly improved and so would hers. And I think, kind of stealing that kind of idea as we get into the patient experiences, all of the data exists in terms of the intelligence to understand what is the best financial outcome for every patient that interacts within a user interface. The problem with the industry is that we're not utilizing that intelligence to guide the individual options and personalize to the very best outcome. So knowing whether a patient should qualify in terms of financial assistance, should be treated differently, and the user interface should interact differently with that patient as it does with a patient that has, coming from a 2-insurance household with 2 employers that has the ability to pay in full versus a patient that maybe is underemployed, underinsured, that needs a sweet spot payment plan directing them, knowing that they can pay, up to $100 or up to $50 a month, and being able to spread that payment over 10, 12, 15 months according to that, or whether it actually goes outside of the financial policy of the hospital or health system and needs to extend into patient financing within that option. Those are all capabilities that exist within the market today, but very few are focusing on putting that intelligence around guiding how the patient moves through the user interface. Instead, we're going to, at least in most of the industry, still allows that friction to exist to where we're treating everybody as the same, yet we all have different outcomes, and we can make it even better for that. That same mentality exists within the CSR environment. If you go into the financial sector, if you go into the automotive sector, any of those environments, most of the customer service environments are scripted down to the individual consumer and what that individual needs to say and when they need to say it. But within healthcare, we script less than 5% within call center environments directionally from the patient experiences. And so in order to bring that intelligence into that conversation and allowing those options to exist within the user interface or the UI to where that is then prompting the CSR to then guide that conversation. And we like to say it's with empathy in the sense of when we're talking to a patient that maybe just had a husband or a father or a grandparent that was terminally ill and they're the responsible party versus a patient that is qualifying for financial assistance. Instead of getting beat and really driven to the point that we need balance in full and that's the end all be all, we can have an empathetic conversation around this patient and guide them on the pathway of that financial experience. And again, move the friction out of that environment. So if I can get to that outcome within the first 2, 3, 4 minutes using the intelligence, that's obviously going to make a better financial outcome, but it's also going to create a better patient financial experience. And that's very significant in terms of the competitive landscape that we have within healthcare now, knowing that each individual patient, qualifying, I think the measurements that I read was that each individual patient is probably valued around $184,000 from a self-pay responsibility. When that extends into a household, that actually goes up to $504,000. And so that financial experience and whether they come back in your doors is very important. And it's very significant to have the intelligence not only guiding the self-service environment, but the intelligence guiding the CSR environment to be able to drive to that empathy and drive to that experience. And as we move to the next slide, it also drives to better financial outcomes. And so it's not uncommon where we've seen in the industry that when individual organizations are utilizing intelligence to guide the engagement and to guide the payment experience to where they're seeing upward trajectories of total collections of 7%. But when we boil down to an analytical environment of taking the patient payment rate, then this is really the amount that the patients are paying more of their balance. And it's really the only analytical way that you can really view what has been your actual effective rate, right, in terms of how you've affected the patient behavior. And this is really around when you start to think about UI modifications and how do you engage the patients to drive better outcomes. It's really around behavioral science in terms of how do I modify existing patient behaviors in terms of what they're doing today and how do I get them to do something tomorrow by the way that I engage or by the way that I put different screens, intelligence options, or words in front of them that then modifies those behaviors. And as such, we've seen increases from 1.24 up to 1.55. And again, that's the balance, the difference in terms of how the patient's paying of that balance. When you look at that and kind of extrapolate it over, medium and large site hospitals, that could range from an additional 250,000 in additional collections in the door, meaning that we're just getting the patient to pay more of their balance, or up to 2.3 million increase in that additional collections and revenue within that. When you're looking at how you're managing your individual call center, how many have switched a new EMR or HIS system? And one of the first things that you're trying to do within that conversion is how do we get more and more of our patients to elect into the digital environments? And in order to do that, how are we increasing the self-service rates to where they're doing more for themselves than what that we're trying to do for them? That means going into an outbound or an inbound IVR. That means going into the portal environments. How are we getting them to not have the interactions with the humans in order to get that? In order to drive that intelligence and the engagement, we've seen increases of north of 35%. And you start to think about that. If I'm able to cut 35% out of my call center environment, that means that I can actually take longer periods of time with patients that have complex challenges to be able to drive to those comfort levels that those patients and guarantors need. In addition to, I might be able to redeploy resources, or I might not need as many resources in this very labor-constrained market that we're all dealing with right now, and it's very significant. When we think about how that extends into e-bill adoption, kind of that same self-service rate in terms of trying to drive to that, we're seeing almost a 3x increase in terms of 2.5. When you start to think about that's $4,000 you're saving for each 10,000 printed communications that you're no longer sending out, or almost $5,000 for every 10,000 pieces that you're not sending out. Those dollars add up significantly, and the cool thing is that every time a patient digitally converts, they're paying faster and they're paying more, and they're self-servicing. So it's the kind of waterfall effect that is had within the market, and it's really exciting that it really stops to think around how do we introduce intelligence into these flows to where we're narrowing the lanes and providing the very best options for patients to choose, and reducing that friction. So not only do we have better outcomes, but our patients have better financial experiences as well. And so as we kind of think about what happens behind the scenes, I want to introduce Marlon Prato in terms of RevSpring to kind of take us through behind the scenes and what happens within the payment environments.
Thanks so much, Casey. That was quite the patient journey you described there. So I'm going to go into a little bit of behind the scenes. What happens when we make those purchases at Amazon, Walmart? I'm sure you mentioned your daughter. She loves going out shopping, right? So let's talk about that payment experience. We've got the consumer, the citizen, businesses, government entities making those payments. And then we've got the merchants processing, Amazon, Walmart, accepting that payment from a cardholder, and then the processors. Processors are processing the payments on behalf of the merchants, the customers. So they transmit the payment data to payment network card brands, which are the Visa, the MasterCard, the American Express, and that's the payment network. And then we go on to the settlement piece, those funds, the available funds, the US banks, the Wells Fargos of the world. As we dive into that next slide, this is a deeper dive into what that ecosystem looks like. So payment processors transmitting the payment data to the payment network brands, depending on what card type it is, whether it's Visa, American Express, and again, the cardholder experience. Who are they? The merchants, the processors, the payment networks, the card brands, which is Visa, MasterCard, and then the financial institution. The end result, merchant acquiring, and that payment experience, that settlement transaction. Next slide. So merchant fees, let's talk about this a little bit. This is a bit complex, but we can make it easier. If we take a look at merchant fees, I love pictures. This chart, 90% of your total cost acceptance is interchange. So that depends on how the transaction, the actual transaction that's issued at Amazon or Walmart will be accepted. When the transactions have been settled each day, the payment provider to the processor network process on behalf of that merchant, that customer. So it routes the transaction over to the card brands, the Visa, the MasterCard, and then it even depends on what type of credit card it is. It could be a credit, it could be a debit, even the method. So, what did Casey present at Walmart? Was it a debit card? And how was it swiped? Industry type, was it retail for Walmart? All these factors play into interchange qualifications. So it's really important when you're evaluating payment providers that you're comparing apples to apples when it comes to the fees and the rate structure. If you take a look at the remainder of that, that's 7% total acceptance cost assessment fees that are paid by the processor. So that's more the operational costs behind the scenes, maintaining that infrastructure. And then finally, the 3%, the processing total acceptance cost. So the customer, myself, Casey's daughter, plus a set of margin. Fees differ based on what that interchange effort was. So it depends on the qualification. And you really need someone that has expertise to perform that analysis on what the best fee structure is for you. But it is very important to really have someone that understands the payment business. Next slide, please. So payment and data security, another key issue here as we evolve more into the e-commerce world. So what is PCI? Payment Card Industry Requirements. It's an ongoing data security standard that we have to follow. So from a patient's perspective, as Casey described the patient journey, credit card data needs to be secure. I want to feel secure when I'm putting in inserting my credit card, tapping my credit card, whatever it may be, my form of payment, whether it's alternative payments, but continually monitoring it and maintaining safety concerns and vulnerabilities. So those are all checks and balances when you're talking to your payment provider, selecting that payment provider, that you have to take into account. The PCI compliance, the EuroPay address verification, those are just some items that really need to be taken into account. Next slide, please. And then you've got your single source provider, some things to consider when looking at merchant services programs, all the payments behind the scenes. The single source provider, make sure that they have the infrastructure and knowledge in place. So it needs to be nimble enough that they can address any issue. What's that strategy look like? Don't be bounced back and forth with provider questions that can't be answered. Determine your true savings from a fee analysis perspective. What does that look like? And that's a free analysis that can be taken place. And then have them be your trusted advisor. Finally, cut that reconciliation time in half. Without automated reconciliation, employees' productivity, satisfaction, how does that go through? What can I reconcile? Reducing write-offs due to faster and better reconciliation tools. True savings, look into the buying power that your payments provider has. Understand if they're reselling to another processor. What does that mean? So ask the right questions and have them come up with the right strategy that's good for you. Next slide, please. And then 4 key areas to evaluate. If you're entertaining the idea of switching payment providers, there's 4 key areas here that we look at. Tokens, current payment plans, hardware options, current contracts, and then finally the EHR integration. Things to consider. Tokens. New vendor should have a process to securely migrate over those tokens. And let's talk a little bit about tokens. What are they? Tokens are specific to each payment vendor. They're used to provide the sensitive payment information related to your cards and your bank accounts. So that's key. They protect personal identity and reduce fraud. So limit a critical role in preventing data breaches and lost data. We all know how many data breaches have been out there in the industry. So we need to be cognizant of the fact of how we can manage this better. So how many payment plans do you have that are outstanding? Will your current provider release them? Is it easier to let the current plans migrate out? Can you reach out to patients and reestablish those payment plans? So those are some items that really need to be considered when you're evaluating payment providers. Next slide, please. And then finally, the hardware options. So hardware could be specific to the processor, proprietary, product lifecycle, the makes and models, the usage requirements. Will I need new hardware or can they be re-encrypted? Really some serious considerations as you evolve. Important to lean on your payment vendor. It's key for their expertise here. And then one item that's truly unique to RevSpring is the deviceless payments. And does it meet your strategy? So a key differentiator for RevSpring is that it came about in the days of early COVID, as we all know. Lots of work from home, call centers were shutting down, and customer service reps were taken to take payments from home. So what happened there? Inconsistencies, PCI risk, and then they were able to take this deviceless payment, and it's a great alternative to the payment, the actual physical payment device that providers could have between 50 and 100, 800,000, depending on the size of the call centers. So that's huge from a capacity perspective and taking those payments on. And Casey, I will turn it over to you so we can talk a little bit about current contracts and what those obligations mean.
Yeah, thank you, Marlene. Appreciate the additional education too. And I think it's important to share that I'm not an attorney and I'm not giving you legal advice. I think that's always something that should always be stated so no one gets confused. But I think it is important, and we think it's important for an education environment to really understand from a contractual obligation perspective, where are you and what limitations and or freedom or flexibility, maybe is a better way to say that, do you have inside of your current agreement as you're looking at making some changes as you move forward. I think the first thing always to understand from a contractual perspective is, when does the contract expire? Are you within the termination period, or are you up to where you need to provide notice before that contract automatically renews? A lot of times contracts have evergreen clauses to where if you're not saying, hey, we're not renewing, then they automatically renew for an additional period. So I think it's always understanding when the contract expires and where the individual timeframes and your notice periods are within that. And it's also important to understand, do the benefits, if your contract does have a long tenure on it, and you're not able to terminate for convenience, then you need to look at, where your individual value lines up in terms of what you're looking at versus any type of negative outcome that would be in ending that contract early, such as an early termination fee. Then you just have to make a decision from a business perspective. Does the actual early termination fee and the negatives in terms of eliminating that contract outweigh the positives that would be looking and moving forward and moving in a different direction, maybe in some of the elements that we're talking about in today's environment? But that's certainly something for yourself from a business perspective, as well as your legal team, to kind of take note of that. Just a couple of highlights in terms of what we see in those interactions. As we move forward in terms of EHR integrations, a lot of things that are considering within this is really around going back to what I was stating in the very beginning, is that we're eliminating friction within the process. And I've seen this, and being now over 20 years within this kind of space from a patient engagement and from a payment application perspective, I've seen things ebb and flow in terms of different trends that are taking place. From an EHR integration, I will certainly tell you that the trend across all EMRs and EHR environments is that you want your staff and you want your patients natively involved in that EMR and EHR environment. And it's all around to eliminate the friction in the amount of data environments that are back and forth between the individual systems. And so are you picking an institution or a partner that is putting integration from an EMR, HIS environment as an absolute pinnacle in terms of prioritization, in terms of their platforms? And I think that's very significant, because when you look at the integrations that exist across most of the large platforms, it's around eliminating those friction points and making it easier for the patient, and making it better for the customer service rep, making it better for the point of service environment, so that this action that I'm taking now doesn't have a secondary and a tertiary action either this evening or the next day, because now I have to worry about getting data to integrate through file-based integrations instead of just hitting real-time APIs and real-time settings. The other thing is that everything is working seamlessly, meaning that I'm a patient, I'm inside of the patient portal environment from a clinical perspective. I'm doing things that I need to do from a clinical environment. I now have a bill due, or I want to sign up for delivery within those mechanisms, that I don't have to leave this environment to then log back into something differently. And I think that's a huge driver from a patient experience perspective, as well as from a CSR, because you don't want your CSRs in one application and then obviously having to bounce out to another one in order to perform their jobs. But at the end of the day, what it's really trying to do is that it's trying to work to where it's a seamless environment, to where no one really knows what's happening behind the scenes, and the data is flowing in real time through API integrations, and that all data is posting in a real-time environment. So the good part is that when we look at the EMR integrations, we know we have a very special guest with us today, in Billy Watson, who is from WVU Medicine, that has gone through some of these journeys from a payment application. And it's really our pleasure, Billy, to have you within our webinar and our education topic today. But let's start with a little bit of background on your organization and your time as a RevSpring customer.
Okay, good afternoon, everybody. Again, I'm Billy Watson, Director over the Enterprise for WVU Medicine. I feel that we're a decent-sized hospital. As you guys could see, we have a gross revenue of $7.2 billion, with an additional $1 million coming from our PB physician side. Our patient AR is $982 million, with an additional $160 million for our physician side. We have our inpatient discharges at 82,000, inpatient days at 438,000. We have 3,500,000 number of claims, with a daily average of 29 million. Our OP accounts at 2 million, Our denials at 372,000. We post payments are posted at 2.4 billion. We have 288,000 ED visits with authorization request of 270,000. So I believe we've been with RevSpring for about 10 years now. I started on the team in 2017, coming with a strong call center background. I was tasked with a goal to bring all of our outsourced billing offices back in-house. So we started with about 3 to 4 hospitals, and we were able to successfully accomplish that goal of replacing our early out provider with an in-house solution where RevSpring was able to provide intelligent workflows and enhanced statements and scorings. Then we did so well, we then implemented an inbound, outbound dialer, which reminds our patients of upcoming and past due balances. We were so successful with that we are now up to 20 hospitals in our system, and that was all accomplished with the help from RevSpring partner with us to make this a seamless transaction.
Yeah, Billy, thank you for that. And certainly, when you look at the size and scope of WV Medicine, certainly, very significant within the region, very innovative within its nature, and just really great people. So again, thank you so much for spending time with us today and helping educate some of our other customers and friends in the industry. When you look at the success that you guys had, Billy, when they brought you in and you added these technology points and the intelligence around the patient engagement as well as the payment applications, you guys were still hospital billing and physician billing separate, meaning that you had all the technology deployed on the hospital side, but not yet on the physician side. Kind of talk to us around, what the reason for you're wanting to move into that process in terms of getting the technology on the physician side, and what did that look like?
So definitely for cost savings, that was the number one thing, as well as to provide the excellent customer service. We wanted to have a one-call resolution to patients' questions. I've held sessions with patients, and their number one concern was hey, when we call in, we talk to you about our hospital bill, then we need to talk to another team about the physician bill. So we wanted to bring it all together, create one single combined statement that's going to save us cost on postage, all kinds of cost savings for us. So we wanted to implement that.
Yeah. So when you were thinking about in terms of that technology, certainly had the cost savings of postage and some other things, but from an investment perspective around the technology, did you guys have budget to deploy that technology just over on the physician side right away?
Oh, nope. We did not have a budget. We needed to, reach out and find ways with our finance department to figure out how we can implement this since we didn't have a budget. And, that's when we looked into merchant service fund.
Yeah. And I think that's a good segue as we transition to the next slide. When you look at merchant providers and starting to have that conversation in terms of the merchant provider environment, how did that conversation start in terms of changing merchant services with your leadership? Because oftentimes that's tied with a relationship to the banking partner and all that kind of stuff. So just kind of walk us through that, Billy.
Well, Casey, I actually, our finance department actually reached out to us, because they had concerns. They, figured if we had a single business office and we had a system that it would be, we would have more cost savings. So they actually reached out to us. It was a pretty hard, transition. The team went back and forth to talk about some of the challenges that they thought could happen, but it was definitely for cost savings.
Yeah. And do you remember, Billy, around how much you were able to save annually that you were able to provide over to the technology for the physicians?
I think it was about $300,000, Casey.
Really significant in terms of when you think just changing out the merchant environment was able to bring $300,000 to where you were able to use those dollars to deploy additional technology into the physician to really accomplish what you guys were looking at to accomplish from a single business office. When you think about, and you said it was kind of a hard, and you think about earlier in terms of perceived barriers when switching a payments provider, What were some of the areas your financing team needed to address in switching the merchant services? And do you remember some of the benefits that they gained in that process, Billy?
So yeah, I think some of the big ideas or concerns was consolidating the MIDs with any reconciliation challenges that we may have. Also, working within Epic is what we want to do mainly. We wanted our credit card processing integration into Epic. So our IT department was very nervous about having to build the entire credit card process in Epic. But thankfully, we didn't have to do that because RevSpring was able to map on the background to combine all of our merchant IDs to one single merchant ID. But we were still able to run reports out of each of those merchant desks. So the only thing we really had to do was uptrain our staff so that they knew they could reconcile on each desk to the cash drawer. So we were very thankful that you guys were able to do that on the background for us so that it was like a seamless transaction or transition for our team.
That's great, Billy. I remember being a couple of those conversations, and in finance and accounting, we're certainly happy to be able to reduce and consolidate those MID environments. And for those of you who don't know what a MID is, that's just short for merchant ID. So a lot of times you'll have, an organization the size of West Virginia at that time had, I think, access of over 400 different MID structures that they had deployed across their enterprise. So the consolidation of that was very significant. A lot of customers talk about the roadblock of tokens and devices. You did have kind of that viewpoint. You talked a little bit about your IT team in terms of really nervous around how they're going to mapping to the MIDs. I also remember them being very nervous around the devices, around how that was going to happen. But you didn't have those issues, correct?
Absolutely, we did not have those issues because you guys were already processing our payments and had all of our tokens and everything. So it was very seamless. It was very easy.
Yeah, that's good. So as we think about just kind of taking the Epic stance a little bit further in terms of the next slide, when we look at what the success that you had in terms of implementing the technology, and that was on a native Persona Pay RevSpring environment, and then as you consolidated the hospital billing and the physician billing, you guys went into a single business office within that environment, and at that point, it made sense for you guys to just move forward with the Epic integration, but to kind of move back a little bit, when you were looking at, billing your total volume at about 69 million on average a month, and we were able to get about a 1.9% increase in that patient payment rate that we gave some other examples before. I mean, that was about $1.3 million a month and really annualized about $15.7 million annually that you were able to increase in terms of yield from your patient population within using that intelligence and the Epic, or I'm sorry, the Persona Pay RevSpring native applications. And that was very significant for the organization, but yet the drive for Epic integration was greater. And so what other benefits did you see, Billy, when you think about, going from kind of that outside portal environment to then RevSpring supporting West Virginia University of Medicine in their desire to have all things Epic and really RevSpring stance in terms of supporting that vision?
When we switched from doing our early out to using your propensity scoring and the reminders, we didn't see any of our collections drop, but we did see cost savings, so that was great. The flexibility and the ideas that you guys have and to engage our patients, you already have all of our patients' information, the trends of what's going on. It's really good, and we've always were able to balance that with doing everything in Epic with your product. So, the interaction with your tools, your presumptive charity with patients that need additional reminders, exploring some of the data that you guys already have to identify our patients, to engage us with electronically submitting information within Epic. So you're always, really good with helping us, on all of our things that we do with reminders, working on integrations in real time, credit card processing going through Epic. You've been very flexible with us and always willing to step in and help us out.
So kind of when we think about that, Billy, you guys have made, a lot of great decisions in terms of just having an unbelievable staff. Again, WVU Medicine has just a strong reputation for being, innovative and very patient centric in terms of that. But as we move forward in terms of top lessons learned, I always think it's very critical because not everybody makes all the right decisions. And so when you think about that, what are some of the top lessons that you learned? And how would you advise anybody in the audience that might be looking to do the same in making a switch on payments providers? What advice would you give them?
I truly think that you need to have a partner that you trust, one that is going to work with you, be flexible, act quickly to your requests, and has a technology background, because things do continue to change, and we want to ensure we are complying with state regulations and et cetera at all times. And I think you guys are really good with helping us with that. So for instance, I can give you a situation. We just brought Ohio hospitals into our hospital system, and we realized that there's a regulation that you need to send out financial applications on the first billing statement for all Ohio residents. I mean, it was a simple email over to your team, and within that week, we had those in those statements already. So it's just that flexibility and that trust, knowing that we're going to ask of something and it's going to be done, and we don't need to have to follow up.
Well, thank you for that, Billy. Being that, at least from our experience, we've seen you guys as continue to be iterative, meaning that you're always thinking of something new. So what's next for WVU?
Oh, we have a couple of things. We're thinking about using your scoring to auto enroll all of our patients, some of our patients, into electronic forms. As everybody knows, with Epic, it's kind of like a flip switch and everything goes. But you guys are able to use your channel scoring, which will allow us to select certain patients that we want to auto enroll in, which is a great thing for us.
Well, Billy, thank you so much for your time today. Thank you for your advice and your experience. I think this drastically helps others who are looking to look into either changing or modifying their current payment experience and their partnerships with that. So we just want to thank you for that. Just in closing, I think it's important that we just kind of go back a little bit and really focus in on what we, at least in our advice, what we see as very significant within the industry. And I think it's self-awareness really comes first in terms of are things that you feel important truly important to you? Meaning that if you truly believe that your patients come first, do your applications and does your technology actually support that? Meaning that if I'm walking and stating in meetings that patients first, are we investing within the technologies that are actually removing friction from the experiences of patients? Are we actually investing in intelligence and technology that are actually guiding our people to have more informed and empathetic conversations with patients, either at point of service or on the phone? Are we truly focused in on putting situations and technologies into a patient-centric environment? That is only for you all to answer, but at least I find to be very credible in terms of being in those meetings that does, your actual words echo what your actual actions are. I know my mom used to tell me when I was growing up trying to make good financial decisions, and she said, well, give me your checkbook and I'll tell you what's important in your life. And I think that that's, really true when it comes to the patient experience, is how are you spending your dollar, and are you spending that dollar wisely in determining whether you're actually getting value? And if you determine the value for the patient and receive kind of the negatives or any type of perpetual issue that would be in resources, does that outweigh that actual benefit? And I think the answer is always going to come down as no or yes, meaning that the value is always going to outweigh those individual resource challenges around that. But I would highly encourage you to consider the economics. This is most likely an investment in terms of to be able to get a return within that environment. I've done this for a really long time. We have many tremendous clients like Billy that are witness to what they've been able to do from a patient population perspective. But if you're willing to make the investment in terms of putting your patients first, the natural flow of that is that when you treat people better, the outcomes also become better. and you have a true win-win relationship, meaning that your patients are happy and your actual financial outcomes and your measurements will follow that environment. We've seen it from time and time again, and we're just really excited to be with you today and providing a little bit of education within the payment space. I want to thank Marlon for her great information, and again, want to thank Billy for just such a great job. If you're excited about any of this information and you want to be continued to be pushed and prodded in terms of doing what's right by patients and trying to be innovative within that experience, please hit the QR code that's on the screen and follow us on LinkedIn. Jacob, I'll turn it back over to you, sir.
Thanks, Casey. Appreciate it. That is all the time that we have for today. I want to thank Marlon, Casey, and Billy for an excellent discussion today, and also to RevSpring for sponsoring today's webinar. Please do not hesitate to reach out for any questions. Thank you again for joining us today. We hope to see you at future Becker's webinars.
Awesome. Well, we're excited to be able to do some audience Q&A now for the next 5 or 10 minutes. So we have a couple questions coming in, but as a reminder to our attendees, if you do have any other lingering questions, feel free to submit those in that Q&A box that you see on your screen, and we'll try and get through as many as we can. All right, Casey, Marlon, I have a couple questions for you guys already. So Casey, I'm going to start with you. You did kind of touch on this a little bit, but the question here is, what kind of integrations are possible with Epic? And so Casey, if you wouldn't mind touching on that a little further for us.
Yeah, thank you for that. I appreciate it. RevSpring has committed a significant amount of our research and development to continue to empower our clients' Epic investments. At this time frame, we have over 9 apps approved within the App Orchard that ranges from direct integration from appointment reminders all the way back through from a payment environment, in addition to bringing our score, which is our RevSpring Predict score, which handles propensity financial assistance, as well as the address verification through the front end, through the Q22 environment, and or within a post-adjudicated, statement-based environment for propensity, ability, and financial assistance. And then in addition to all the payments environment, there's a lot of nuance around payments in terms of integration. It can go from what our core focus is, which is supporting Epic native functionality within the credit card framework with point-to-point encrypted devices, as well as our deviceless payments modal inside of the credit card framework that segments PCI, in addition to the external payment page. So it really ranges from time of service or even pre-service to time of service to the back end, all the way through. But great question. Thank you.
Awesome. Thanks for clarifying that for us. This next question here says, how has the supply chain affected getting payment devices? And Marlon, would you mind, can I turn that one to you?
Sure, thank you. So I would say yes, it's certainly been a challenge. However, it's important to stay very close to your inventory management, working closely with your vendor, obviously striving for excellence, understanding those strategies, the product life cycle, the makes, the models. So stay very close, understand what your customers' demands are from an inventory pipeline perspective, and manage that with your vendor so that you do have the inventory in place. So it is very challenging, but you can certainly work through those challenges by staying close to it. Thank you.
Thank you for answering that one, Marlon. Next question from this attendee. How long did it take WVU from planning to go live to bring in the physicians group? And maybe, Casey, you want to touch on that one?
Yeah, that's great. I think it was really twofold. There was kind of 2 parts of the decisioning there. The first part was obviously the Epic planning, because their physicians were in a different service area. So they made the decision to bring that into a single business office. I think that time frame was around the 6-month mark in terms of their Epic planning to move into that. And then there was the decision around utilizing the actual technology within the physician environment now that it was in a single business office. Within that environment, it was 3 or 4 months from the planning and decisioning, once they had already started down the pathway of the single business office decision.
Awesome. Thank you so much. And then we did have a couple audience questions come in about recordings and slides and things like that. So I can happy to address that. All attendees will receive a recording of today's webinar right after we conclude. So take a look in your inbox and you should receive that shortly. All right, cool. We're just out of time. So I might give Casey and Marlon the floor one more time if there's any wrap-up comments from you. Marlon, I'll have you start if there's any kind of wrap-up insights that you want to share with the group.
Sure. So I would say that first and foremost, thank you for your time today. When selecting a single source provider, remove the complexity out of your card processing environment and understand from a trusted advisor approach, consultative approach, what that solution looks like. Make sure it's patient-centric, single source, so that you don't have all these different touch points. It's so much more streamlined to work with that single source provider. Casey, over to you.
Thank you.
Yeah, I think that, the very significant part of, I think, the conversation today was certainly around just kind of walking through the West Virginia and Billy kind of communicating what the desire was. But I think it's always important to understand that even though you want to move forward from an innovation and you're not certain that you can pay for it, it's very significant to understand what are the assets or levers that you potentially can pull that potentially can fund the innovation. And that's really what I took from the interactions with West Virginia, whether it was Billy or Leah Klinke, who is the Vice President of Revenue Cycle at WVU, was that there was a very strong desire to enhance the patient experience and improve yield within their patient interactions and engagement. And even though they did not have the budget for it at that time, they were very direct and very persistent in terms of finding a way to be able to fund that initiative. And so it was very unique and very rewarding to work with Billy and Leah and the amazing WVU team to really not be denied for a better engagement to the patients, which then yields better response and outcomes within the revenue cycle perspective, and all while being paid for something that is kind of almost a happenstance in the industry nowadays, to where additional value can be brought to light. So it was a very rewarding experience overall, but I think the lessons learned out of this is once you set your mind to something in terms of enhancing the experience and generating better yield out of the patient experience, then what are the individual levers that you can pull in order to fund that? And a lot of times you can find those individual levers by cost savings of services that you already have, and or whether it's a return on investment to where it's going to take a little bit of investment to return such a great outcome when it comes to not only the patient loyalty, but certainly better patient interaction as a whole. So just hats off to our RevSpring technology, as well as just the amazingness that West Virginia University of Medicine has within their teammates led by Leah Klinke and Billy Watson.
Perfect. Great way to wrap us up. So thank you again so much. A huge thank you to Casey, Marlon, and Billy for the excellent discussion and insights brought to the table today. And then also a great thank you to RevSpring for sponsoring our webinar. And attendees, before we close out, if you haven't already, please make sure you check out our additional resources and fill out our session survey, which both can be found on your dashboard. Thank you again for joining us. Have a great 4th of July holiday weekend if you have plans, and we hope to see you at future Becker's webinars. Thanks again.